give us and to give the industry much needed advice and much needed expertise. We're going to start off first with, please tell us something about yourself.
Yeah, so my background is in turnarounds and restructuring. So I've worked with a number of CEOs who've been running companies in difficult circumstances and challenged with turning those around and getting them growing. So that's a number of industries, people like Philip Rowley at AOL Europe, releasing $6 million and getting them to profitability. Andy Homer, who's now owns Towergate. He was at AXOMO, losing £100 million a year, and working with Andy, getting that turnaround into profitability. And also with mid-sized companies, so in the States, with a service business called Dendrite. They were in a difficult position, and then working with the management there to double their value in a year. So I'm currently a director with a firm called Alex Partners in their London office, and Manny would see us as the leaders in turnaround and restructuring businesses.
That's fantastic. And you work with, I would assume, all around the world. Where are your biggest markets?
I guess it's any market where companies want to make, either they're in a difficult situation, they need to turn around, or you have very ambitious owners like hedge funds. So we're big in the US, so we did the restructuring of General Motors, which people may have heard, one of the world's most historic companies, getting into difficult circumstances and is now being reborn. The big chemical companies like Lyondell, Basel. My own specialism is financial services and media and technology firms. So I work with that in the US and in Europe, and I know it's here in Dubai.
You mentioned about obviously coming out of the downturn. So, well, many countries are coming out of the downturn of the recession.
Yep.
There's still a threat of stagnation, if not a possible double dip, which many are predicting for the end of the year or probably spring next year. What do you see to be the biggest challenges for companies to recover quickly and beat prevailing growth indices?
Right. I guess the big change that we've had now coming out of the global recession and now into the debt crisis is businesses are getting back to fundamentals. So we had 10 years of mega growth, limitless money going around, and everybody was having a great time. Maybe things were a bit easy. And then we've had one of the worst crises in 80 years. And it's basically asking business leaders to go back to absolute fundamental basics of business, focusing on cash, focusing on the customer, because that's where the cash comes from, and then looking at their revenue model and their cost structure and their processes to make their businesses as successful as possible. So I know we sex it up, and we'll talk about some of those things later, but that probably goes back several hundred years. So if you look on the back of the £20 banknote in the UK, you'll see the picture of the original pin factory that started all this process management thinking back in the 18th century.
Yeah, I guess it's much to do with, correct me if I'm wrong, but in resting on their laurels, they forget how they got to those laurels.
Yeah. So I guess the big thing here at the moment is around the world is around cash. Whether you're a government or a public corporation or a company, cash is really tight. Perhaps it was too easy in the past. So now governments, whether that's Greece we've heard about, or Portugal or Spain, or companies who've borrowed billions of debt in the past to leverage up their business. Now those loans are starting to be rolled over, and the banks either can't afford or won't actually be willing to roll over those debts into the future. So the management of those companies are really being asked now to go back to fundamentals. Do you have a customer proposition that stacks up? Have you got a business model that then supports that? And then have you got the processes that make that work? And that's all the business fundamentals that we've known for the last 30 years, but now you really have to focus on them.
Fair enough. Many companies have already made significant changes. They've taken the low-hanging fruit in terms of more obvious initiatives and implemented multiple continuous improvement initiatives. But they're still not recovering as quickly as they want to. What are your observations in terms of the typical things that have been missed?
I guess what people have done is used all the recipes that they've had in the past for taking costs out. So that's why we talk about the low-hanging fruit and all the obvious things. So anything that they generally thought about, that's been implementing cost savings. Some of the outsourcing and offshoring is gone. So basically that's run dry. So there's probably two areas that would suggest they look at, and maybe if they come to the conference, learn about it. One is making a much more deeper fundamental attack on the cost structure and taking about 10 to 20% of the costs out of the business. And some of the most powerful techniques are, you would learn on the CPM courses, people who are familiar with that, levels 1 to 3. And then the other is fundamentally rethinking your business model from first principles, from the customer and your business processes and the structure around that. And that's some of the more sophisticated levels that you get on levels 4 and above. That allow people to reinvent the business from first principles and make dramatic changes to their cost structure and revenue structure.
John, do you have a recipe for company turnaround? How would you typically approach what are definitely tough and definitely far-reaching initiatives?
Right. I guess I want to say you do have an advantage in a turnaround situation, and I know Professor Cotter talks about the burning platform, which comes about the Piper Alpha platform in the North Sea. When the platform was on fire, the guys inside were in a secure cell that was designed to survive any fire that could be possibly on an oil platform. But they suddenly got a feeling that their lives were at stake, so they could either stay in the safety of that safety shell, or run through their lives and dive into the sea with boiling oil and gas all around them. But because they were convinced their lives were at stake, they had the courage to go out, and those that went with the guy who led them out of there, they survived. So my so what is, people probably know in their heart what needs to be done, but one thing about a crisis is it gets you really to focus on those things and do what needs to be done. So in terms of business, that is looking at the fundamentals, the cash, and then deeply looking at cost take-out in that business in the short term. If you can really focus on that, on being higher cash generation and taking cost out, that helps you through the 3-12-month crisis of a turnaround. And then you look to the future of what does it take to really make the customers happy. And then it's all around profitable growth. And there's two ways of doing it. So give an example, if we look at the aircraft industry, you've got Ryanair who've come up with a fantastic business model around low cost. And here in Dubai, we've got an alternative model, which is Emirates Airlines has equally been incredibly successful. It's a world hub for transport between Asia and Europe and America. They've bought 90 on order A380s, the world's most advanced jet. So there are many different ways that you can fundamentally think up your business. But those are examples of two companies that have really thought through from first principles what does it take to be successful, and then they're really focused on delivering what it takes. The companies that get crunched in the middle are those that just stick in the middle, so they don't really address any of the problems, and they're getting killed from the people like Emirates Airways at the top, and then the Ryanairs and the EasyJets at the bottom.
You mentioned that. I wanted to touch on, you mentioned survival. In times of crisis,
Yep.
the survival instinct kicks in for a normal life,
Yep.
but it's the same for businesses, because in times of crisis, the successful businesses are the ones that go on to the survival instincts of a successful business,
Yep.
which is back to the roots, back to the fundamentals
Yep.
of how the business is run.
Yep.
You can get caught up in various business continuity and business improvement strategies,
Yep.
but you still have to go back to how it all started
Yep.
and how it runs to make it a success again.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think that's why, in many ways, a crisis is good.
Yep.
A turnaround is the best time, like you mentioned.
Yeah, so there's probably two parts to those turnarounds. There's getting away from the crisis, and at the moment that's driven by cash, whether that's Greece or General Motors. The companies run out of cash. So the short-term measures tend to be all around managing the cash, the balance sheets, and then aggressive cost reduction measures. However, that only sees you through 12 months, because one of the key things I want to put over and of particular interest to BP Group members is, why did they get into that situation in the first place? So quite often it's either because their business proposition or their business model no longer works, and it can take quite a number of years, like Woolworths was 99 years running in the UK, and then a couple of banks called in their loans and it went bust a few years back. But the issue was, for all the previous years before there, they hadn't really fundamentally addressed their customer proposition or their business model and their proposition, and in their case they never got around to doing it, and then two banks decided to call it in, and then that company disappeared after 99 years. So I would separate between it's really important in a turnaround to get the cash out, be more cash positive, and then get the cost structure under control. But for the long term, you really have to get the customer model, the customer proposition, and then the whole business process around that to make that work, to be sustainable long term. And then a number of the things that we're going to be covering in the conference, and a number of the things you can see on the BP Group website, there's a whole set of tools and frameworks to help people get their heads around how would you do that.
So, in times of crisis and turnaround, how do you approach the cultural and people issues?
Yep. Well, I just have to speak for myself. So the two key things I think you need to have is transparency and honesty. When you've got into a difficult situation, there's a lot of times, and maybe BP, who have a similar name to us when originally they had the problem in the Gulf of Mexico, were in denial or not really addressing it, or not seem to be addressing it. I think in times of crisis, the sooner that you're honest with people and share the situation, then people will rally round. And I can remember early on in my career working for a French car company, and we were the UK subsidiary in trouble. But as soon as the workforce understood the difficulty of the situation we were in and the dire circumstances, that allowed people then to get their heads around how could we work with management, how did we have to change our business to be able to have a long-term survival mode. So me personally, I'm a big fan of actually sharing that, being as transparent and open with people with the facts and the situation you're in. And that allows them then to make the changes that you need to be successful.
Does this approach work in any culture? Have you seen that? Is it more successful in cultures which are more open to transparency?
Well, I've worked around the world, so I've worked in apart from Antarctica, probably in every continent. And obviously you have some countries like maybe America or New Zealand, which are incredibly open, people like to have everything on the table. But I've also worked out in Asia, and maybe they're not as direct sometimes as Americans, but the same things. People always appreciate honesty, and then we respect it as adults to understand the situation they're in, and then play some part in actually coming up with a solution and implementing it. And I think that works across cultures around the world.
Do you see any clear winners, John, emerging over the next year? Especially 2011 is seen as the year of recovery and re-emergence of the global economy. What would you expect to be the main ingredients driving that success for those companies?
Okay, probably two parts. Is companies that have fundamentally a better business model, a better proposition will be successful. I know we're here in Dubai using airline examples, but if you look at Ryanair, who I've flown with, I flew for £11 between my home in Bristol to Dublin, and they have the best on-time record in Europe for delivering their passengers. So that's an example where they really focus on taking out cost and being the best on-time airline. The rest of the experience is then sacrificed, as it were, to making that happen. But they're very successful. So there's a huge growth in what people call the same for less. So you go to Primark, which is a low-cost store in the UK, you can buy the equivalent of the covers for your Mac laptop, which are about £30, £50. You can go into a Primark and buy for £1 or £2. It functions exactly the same. So there's a whole growth of businesses of the same for less. Then you have, if we come here, is people like the Emirates, who've just got a fundamentally better business model. So from Dubai you can fly to any two global cities. We're geographically positioned between North America and Europe and the growing economies of Asia, so it's a perfect location. They've gone out and being the #1 purchaser of the world's most advanced jet, the A380. And they're thinking through the whole, what would it take to be a global communications hub, and then putting all the infrastructure and the service models and the processes around making that successful. So those are two examples of people really thinking through how can we have a really great customer proposition, then what does it take in terms of the business model and processes to make that work. So those are great examples. If you go onto the website, you can see a whole set of tools that you can download for free for helping people think through that situation. I do have one of my favourite examples of sometimes what seems incredibly obvious isn't obvious till somebody points it out. So one of my favourites is Dick Fosbury. So for 2,000 years, 4,000 years, people jumped the straddle for the high jump, the same way that they were doing almost since ancient Greek times. And then along comes Dick Fosbury in the 60s, runs up to the high jump and jumps over it backwards and wins the gold medal. And thereafter, everybody else has been doing that. Now, that's an interesting example of it was absolutely obvious once somebody had done it. It's really simple, but for thousands of years, nobody had really thought of it. So it's a simple example, but some of the most powerful techniques and some of the things you might learn on the BP Group's Level 1 course, they seem really simple, but that shouldn't take away the power that they have in terms of improving your business really rapidly. And once you're told them, they seem incredibly obvious, a bit like Dick Fosbury and his flip. But until you come, you won't know them. So I would encourage people to go onto the website, maybe come to the events, listen to some of the speakers, and I do think they can learn some really powerful approaches that could make a big difference to their career, a big difference to their company.
What modern thinking and methods do you see emerging that assist business turnaround, and how do they contribute?
Maybe this is unfashionable, but I do see a long history of the technique. So I know there tends to be a flavour of the month on a methodology, and then everybody has to go there and buy the T-shirt and then apply that. So the fundamentals around focusing on the customer, making a business model that fits with that, then designing your processes to make those work. They've been around for several hundred years. I mentioned the banknote back in the UK that has the original pin factory in Edinburgh that brought in the first theories of industrialisation and modern management. But I guess if we went back to the ancient Egyptians, they were able to build astonishing pyramids and had advanced mathematical techniques. So I believe we should be really open to the methods and what works. We're very happy to use other people's approaches. In the BP group, we try and look around the world and say, here are some of the simplest and most powerful and rapid to approach techniques to address those fundamentals. Focusing on the customer, taking costs down, growing your revenues, preserving your cash. If somebody invents a new powerful technique like Dick Fosbury tomorrow, then we'll be on for taking that on and making it available and communicating it as simply and as powerfully as possible to the members.
So tell us more about the conference.
Tell us about the conference. I should do a plug as to why you should come there, because my first thing, for about $10, you can download any book you like, any intellectual thinking from the Harvard Business Review of Amazon, and have it in your hands within seconds. So if it was simply around capturing the ideas, it only takes you about 60 seconds and $10 to get the world's best thinking on virtually any business topic ever. So you'd probably be wondering, why should you come to the conference? Why go to Florida? So I think there's probably three things that you might bear in mind. It's my experience that you come to an event like the BP Group, you will pick up an idea, a concept, an example of applying something that can make a real breakthrough difference to your company and to your career. And I think that's probably one of the most valuable things. And then how does that come? And that's probably from two sources. One, you'll get to hear some of the world's best thinkers and communicators on these techniques. So they can take the world's most complicated ideas, most powerful ideas, but make them really simple and easy to grasp. And being there in the flesh and hearing them for real and being able to answer the questions directly, you can get that thinking built up over 30 years and you can take it away from a 3-day conference. So you can get the benefit of 30 years expertise and experience in thinking and take that away with you. And then the other people is you're dealing with your peers, the top business performance and process professionals from around the world. They're gathered there. They're the elite of your profession globally, and you've got the chance to interrelate with them, build relationships with them, not only learn at the conference, but build up friendships and relationships that you can use for years to come. So if you're thinking of coming, thinking, well, I could go onto Amazon and download it. Of course you can do that in 60 seconds. What I would really recommend you is there's nothing like being at the event, hearing the people for yourself, being able to speak and question them and have a conversation with them in person to make a real breakthrough.
Okay. So the live experience definitely does count for
it does make a big impact, yeah.
All right, fantastic. John, thank you very much.
Thank you, Anthony.
It's a very, very